So don't you think a lot of partners, when they first hear about boundaries or think about boundaries, especially when we are in that like traumatized state, we feel like it is either an attempt to punish or an attempt to teach him a lesson, or it is a way to control or try to get him to stop doing X, Y, or Z? And why is that not actually accurate for what boundaries are really about?
Yeah, I do think that that is kind of a misconception about boundaries. And it makes sense why. It makes sense why we come that way, but we want to shift that. The goal of boundaries is to create safety. And the goal of boundaries actually allows you to engage in the relationship more freely than if you don't have boundaries, because the boundaries provides that kind of safe line, and then it gives you room to kind of interact in that space up to that line. And so it allows you to interact more freely. It also sets up a warning flag where, if, for instance, your husband crosses a boundary, that is a sign, then you know immediately, like, whoo, triggers kind of go off and going, there is something wrong here. But I think another thing that's really hard when you come into boundaries, where, that question of, if you're new to boundaries or don't really know how, the question of like, well, what boundaries do I set? Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's another one, because a lot of times we're not sure. We're like, ooh, do I set that boundary of punishing him? Do I set the like, I know I need a boundary. So I think I'll set one there, kind of arbitrarily set a boundary sometimes. And then we think of boundaries a lot of times early on as a wall. So we're like, well, I'll just kind of randomly pick a spot and I'll build a wall, and then that'll be my boundary. And the problem is the first pushback that you get, those boundaries fall.
Mhm.
So how I approach boundaries is a little bit different. Okay, so I approach boundaries from the avenue of, if I put my arms out in front of me in a circle, okay, like I'm hugging a tree, okay, and I think of what makes me me, and everything that makes me me is in that circle. Right. So this is my successes, my failures, my heartbreak, my joys, my dreams, my favorite ice cream, right? Everything is in that circle. And then your arms around it, that's where you end, and that's where the other person begins.
Mhm.
Okay. So I think for boundaries, we actually have to start with ourselves. And so if I look at that and I think, okay, everything that's in my circle, that is mine to nurture, that is mine to own, that is mine to really focus on and take responsibility for. And the thing with that is that everybody else has that circle too. Okay, so when we're talking in the realm of betrayal, I have my circle. That's what I'm responsible for. My husband has his circle, and that's what he's responsible for. And it's really important to know, like, okay, my emotions are in my circle. I need to deal with those. But his emotions are in his circle, and he has to deal with them. So almost being able to visualize this idea of, I am not responsible for everybody else's stuff, right? And the
Yes.
problem in that circle, like you said, kind of creates that boundary, that just like the skin creates that boundary. But a lot of times where we come in as is that our circles are either super small because we don't want to take up space, in this world, or our arms are wide open and we have really no sense of self. So our stuff kind of gets pushed onto somebody else, and their stuff kind of gets pushed onto us. We take on our husband's stuff, and it just gets messy. And I would say that's how the majority of us come into life and come into boundaries, with really no idea of, okay, what is mine to own? Like, where is the line between me and my husband? Like, how does this work?
Mm.
So the first thing too is we got to close that circle and really kind of get clear of who we are and what's in our circle. And then also, if we have a tiny little circle, we have to expand that and allow us to step into the fullness of who we are really made to be.